Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Chris Weidenbar, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Major Matthew Dobney. Animals have been used in war and on operations throughout Australia's military history, serving as pack animals, transport, messengers, protectors, mascots, and companions. They've played an important part in all wars in which Australians have been involved. During the First World War, Australia sent 136,000 horses overseas to perform various duties. Only one returned to Australia, Sandy. He was General Bridges' favourite horse. While the donkey made famous by Simpson on Gallipoli to carry wounded men to medical aid is perhaps the best known example of the wartime use of donkeys, mules were in constant demand to carry supplies to the front lines. In the early years of the First World War, the Camel Corps was formed, and by late 1917, the Desert Mounted Corps had some 6,000 camels in service. The camels were highly suited to the harsh desert conditions and were capable of covering an average distance of over 9 kilometres an hour whilst carrying a soldier, his equipment and supplies. Also during the First World War, many Australians brought animals from home to the training camps in Egypt to serve as unit mascots and companions. Since then, a selection of dogs, cats, goats, possums, rams, eagles, monkeys, turtles, and many more have acted as formal or informal mascots for Australian units. The homing ability and navigational skills of carrier pigeons saw them used in the First and Second World Wars, and some were even awarded medals for gallantry. Working dogs have been used by Australian military forces beginning in 1918, with sappers of the Royal Australian Engineers handling messenger dogs in the trenches of France. Search dogs were used from 1944 after the raising of the 1st Australian Dog Platoon during the Second World War. Mine detection and scout dogs were used in Korea and Vietnam, and explosive detection dogs are currently used to counter the threat of improvised explosive devices in Afghanistan. This morning, a military working dogs memorial dedication was held here at the Australian War Memorial to honour and remember all the dogs that have performed a wide range of duties with the Australian Defence Force. Today, on the National Day for War Animals in Australia, we commemorate the deeds and sacrifices of animals in war. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. I now invite all who are able to please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Thank you. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's first World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway lands. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Albert Edward Smith, who died while fighting in South Africa during the Boer War. Albert Smith was born in Penrith, to the west of Sydney in New South Wales, on Christmas Day, 1877, the son of Thomas and Annie Smith. He was a keen horse rider and an excellent rifle shot. He and his horse, named I'm Sure, won 7 prizes for jumping at the Liverpool and Camden shows. Albert enlisted in the first contingent of the colonial Australians sent to the war in South Africa. His unit, the 1st New South Wales Mounted Rifles, sailed from Sydney aboard the Aberdeen on the 4th of November 1899, arriving at Cape Town in early December. In February 1900, the 1st New South Wales Rifles were involved in the large-scale battle of the Boer War, the Battle of Paardeberg. The Imperial troops had surrounded the laager, or armed camp, of the renowned Boer strategist General Piet Cronje. On the 27th of February 1900, Cronje surrendered and more than 4,000 Boers were taken prisoner. The capture of Cronje's laager was the turning point of the war, and the Boer armies now decided to carry out a guerrilla war against the British Imperial forces rather than attempt any more set-piece battles. After the battle, Albert's unit was reinforced with the 2nd contingent of the colonial New South Wales soldiers. In March 1900, the enlarged 1st New South Wales Mounted Rifles joined the column of Field Marshal Lord Roberts, the commander of the British forces in South Africa. Lord Roberts's army column had the objective of capturing the capitals of the 2 Boer republics. The men and horses of the 1st New South Wales Mounted Rifles struggled through sudden thunderstorms as they crossed the veld. The cold and wet weather and the skirmishes with the Boer took their toll on the horses too, with only 150 of the 500 horses sent with the second contingent surviving until the end of March. In April, Albert wrote to his brother back home in Liverpool, noting the heavy rain and his engagements with the enemy, saying, "It's a mystery to me how any of us are here today, for we have had some narrow squeaks." On the 13th of March, Lord Roberts's forces captured Bloemfontein, the capital of the Orange Free State. Albert and the other New South Wales Mounted Rifles did not participate in the occupation, but were stationed at a camp about 10 kilometres from the town. Conditions in the camp were poor, and outbreaks of dysentery and typhoid fever were becoming common among the Australian and Imperial forces. The effects of heavy rain were made worse by the fact that the men had not been issued with tents, meaning that they were constantly wet and suffering from the effects of exposure. In April, Australian war correspondent and poet Banjo Patterson wrote, "The men are dying like flies from typhoid fever, and fatigue parties can hardly dig the graves fast enough." This situation was exacerbated by the fact that Bloemfontein's water works were held by the Boers for more than a month after the city's capture by the British Imperial forces, meaning that only poor quality water was available for the troops. Albert and his unit were involved in the action at Kari Siding on the 29th of March, but mainly saw action in flying skirmishes against the Boers rather than large-scale battle. By this time, the Mounted Rifles were the northernmost of the Imperial troops, and their scouts were fired on almost every day by Boer patrols. As a result, Albert and his comrades spent their time building defensive trenches around their camps in case of sudden attack. It was not all rain and drudgery. On the 16th of April, Easter Monday, the men of the 1st New South Wales Mounted Rifles enjoyed an afternoon of sports. This involved horse racing, blindfolded foot races, and a tug of war. Yet the rain continued, and without shelter, men continued to sicken and die. In mid-May, the Commander-in-Chief, Lord Roberts, wrote about the difficulty of procuring food for the men other than meat from the local farms. Albert was one of those who became sick. He died at Bloemfontein on the 31st of May of typhoid fever. Private Albert Edward Smith is listed on the Roll of Honour to my right among more than 600 Australians who died while serving in the Boer War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Albert Edward Smith, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening.